Alright, so today I'm doing the SAT math with no calculator portion. So the thing about this one, you get 25 minutes for 20 questions. So it's pretty short compared to the other portions of the test. And if you were to average it that way, which you should not, you have more than a minute for each question, which is pretty good. But don't average it that way. And the reason is because just like the ACT and the SAT with calculator portion, the math, it gets harder as you go through the exam. So the first few questions are easy, then it's medium, then the end ones are pretty hard in comparison to the others. So you should be using your time the least time should be used in the beginning, and the most time you should save a lot of time for the last ones because they do require some more thinking and some more problem solving. Also, the thing with the SAT that's not on the ACT is you have a few pre-response questions at the end with the grid-ins. So I think you have, like question 16 to 20 is gonna be free response. And so the thing is about the difficulty level with that is you go in the multiple choice, that's the beginning questions, that's the first the first questions are multiple choice, so it goes again from easiest to hardest, and then it restarts once you get to the free response. So then like the last multiple choice question, which is like question 15, is gonna be pretty hard, and then question 16 is gonna restart easy again and then go on, and then 20 is gonna be hard. So what I do if I'm struggling with the last couple of questions of the multiple choice part, I skip it and I go on to the grid-ins because I know those first few ones are gonna be pretty easy, like gimmies. So, and then I come back to them. So for this one, because of like how much time they give you and how short it is, I don't think I ever had a time problem with it. So I don't have an exact, here use this amount of time for this amount of questions kind of thing. But if you do find that you need to time yourself more precisely, then I would go through the test and see how much time you have left or how many questions you had left if you didn't get to finish, and do it that way and see how maybe like which ones are it's like the last question, are you getting if you're getting enough time for the last few questions, or if the first three questions are the ones that are giving you some trouble, then maybe focus on finding a faster way to do them or something like that. So basically, in short, I don't have an exact formula for timing on this one, but experiment and see what works for you if you do have trouble with that. So I'm gonna go and work through the test, and I'll give you some tips as I find myself using them. Also, another thing about the SAT math section that's different from the ACT one is that it's a different way of thinking. So ACT is a lot more straightforward, like here's the question, do you know how to do it? And if you don't, then you don't. The SAT is more of like a puzzle. Like there's the question, but at least for me, like the way to figure it out is not a way that I originally thought of it, so practice was really essential. But once you get to the practice, it's fine because the SAT does give you more time, so it kind of evens out, like less straightforward questions for more time, or very straightforward questions but you're crunched for time. So that's why I always say try both a few times or a couple of times before you decide which one you're going to continue with, or if you're going to continue with both like me and take a lot of tests. But yeah, so just think of it as doing a puzzle, and I'll try to give examples. Like when I start the test and I see the questions, I'll try to show you examples of what I mean, like think like it's a puzzle and not just like 1 + 1 = 2. Okay, so this might be straightforward, but you know, like when you're doing the multiple choice section, if you don't have enough time at the end, or you don't know a question, you just bubble it in and go to at least get a chance at getting some points. Same thing goes with the grid-ins, even though they're a lot more annoying to guess at because they're for response and you can literally guess any number within the 4 grids. But like because they only give you 4 spaces on the grid, I think, or 4 or 5, I don't know. But do take a guess. If you don't know, do a common number like maybe 2 or I don't know. Like, you have to take a guess at it, because there is a very small chance that you're right, but it's better than a 0% chance. Another thing that I wanted to mention is don't let word problems, especially big word problems, scare you. So they're putting, instead of giving you an equation, they're putting it into words, and that sometimes confuses a lot of students. So what I do to help me with that, and you don't have to do this if it doesn't help you, but just throwing it out there might help, because that's the way that I think. Like, while I'm reading the problem, before even seeing what they're asking me, I put the words that they're telling me into equations. So if they say there are twice as many apples as there are bananas, I would go ahead and write 2b equals a, twice as many apples as there are bananas. And because I took the test so much, when you read a question like that, they're probably going to ask you to do something with like a system of equations. So it definitely helps having the equation. And just in general, that helps you keep track of what they're saying and not forget things and have to reread the problem and all of that. Yeah, I hope that helps. Word problems, sometimes they give you way too much unnecessary information. For example, pause real quick and read this problem. So I'm assuming you've read it. This, you don't need this entire paragraph. Literally all you need is this formula and this question. You don't even need to know what any of the letters mean. So if you're doing a problem and you find that you're not using like more than half of the information they gave you, don't freak out too much, because you might be right. Sometimes they give way too much information that you really don't need to solve the problem. Another thing is pictures help a lot sometimes not as much, but what I do personally is when I see something that's talking about like a rectangle or anything that I can draw, geometric, anything that I can see visually, that I can make it into a picture, I do that while I'm reading the problem. So let me demonstrate. Problem. It said the width of a rectangular dance floor is W feet. Okay, I already see rectangle. I'm drawing this, W. My awesome art skills. And then it says the length of the floor is 6 feet longer than its width. So I do 6 plus W. And that's also a little bit of what I'm talking about with a puzzle. I mean, not as much with this one. This one is easier, but like, you don't, like, instead of writing length, I say 6 plus W. That's what I mean by it's not as straightforward, but this may not be the best example for that. Anyway, which of the following expresses the perimeter in feet of the dance floor in terms of W? And for me, it's really easy because I already saw this. I know the perimeter is just going to be 2W plus 2 times 6 plus W. And that's my answer. And I really didn't need the picture to do this one. But like, I'm just giving you an example of my instinct of drawing the picture while I'm reading the problem. A lot of people, if you think a lot more algebraically and you just love equations, maybe you don't always need to do that unless necessary. But for me, I really like drawing a picture because then I avoid making careless errors in algebra, algebraic equations and stuff, because I see exactly what's going on. So may or may not be your thing, but again, throwing it out there. Okay, so I found a much better problem to show you what I mean by you have to think of this SAT test as a puzzle. So pause this real quick and read this question. I'm assuming you've had a go at it. So the way that you would do this is, if you know that 2x is greater than 5, then you also know that x is greater than 5 halves. Then they also tell you that y is greater than 2x minus 1. So if x has to be greater than 5 halves, then if you plug 5 halves into the x in the y equation, then that will also be equivalent. So you'll do y is greater than 2 times 5 halves minus 1. And also the thing about the SAT with no calculator, since they know you don't have a calculator, if you find that problems are getting canceled out nicely, like this one here, then you know you're probably doing it right. So to keep going, y is greater than 5 minus 1, y is greater than 4, and that is your final answer, B. So like I said, think of it as a puzzle. We first had to solve for the x, then we plugged in the x into the y, and then we solved it. It's not as straightforward as the ACT one, but it's also not impossible. You just have to get used to that way of thinking. So something else I wanted to mention is that you don't have to have a plan for every problem before you start. And what I mean by that is, looking at this problem, okay, I'm trying to find x here. And this definitely is not a nice equation to start with. I'm gonna have to square stuff, and I'm gonna have to move stuff around. So I don't have to know every single step before I start. All I know is that I need to separate the x. And what I do, like with problems like this, and especially more complicated ones too, I just go ahead and start solving. All I know is I need to separate the x. I'm gonna do some algebra. I just know the method that I'm working with, and I just like see where the pen takes me, really. Just keep on solving. Keep on solving until you get your final solution. And this might be common sense, but personally I had to learn this. Like whenever I found something like this that I didn't know how to do, I'd freak out and I just wouldn't be able to do it until I learned to just let my pen guide me, or my pencil or whatever. Let my pencil guide me and see what the solution is. Another thing that might be helpful is knowing how to do certain things faster, knowing how to do certain problems faster, figuring out certain things faster. For example, I saw this while I was solving a problem because I had to square it, and I went to this straight away. This was my first step, this was my final step. And I don't know, maybe you have to take Algebra 2 for this specific thing to be able to get to this level where your first step is your final answer. But I saw this type of thing where I have to square binomials enough both in school and like SAT, ACT combined, that I was like, okay, like practicing going with just one step is gonna save me a lot of time in the future, even though it might not be very comfortable at first. Like you want to do like you're taught in school, step 1, step 2, blah blah blah. But this definitely saves a lot of time, and this is just one example of many things that you can do in less steps by practice, and it will save you time in the long run. Okay, so another thing, when it tells you in a problem for x is greater than 3 or for x is greater than or less than something, you can pretty much always ignore that, because not always, almost always ignore that, because basically it's just saying that because if it was 3, if you had g of 3, then that would be 0, and you can't have 0 in the denominator. That's the only reason they're saying that. Really has nothing much to do with how you're gonna solve this problem. If you look at a problem and you're like, I have absolutely negative idea about how to do this, skip it and move on. For example, this question. I don't think I learned this honestly until like pre-cal, and there's no solving about it. It's just testing if you know how to read the equation of a circle. It's pretty easy if you know how to do it. But if I'm over here trying to solve this, it's gonna get really messy. This is not meant to be solved in this case, and I'm just gonna be wasting time on other questions that I could get right, that I could get points for. So definitely keep these questions for last if you really have no idea how to do it. Okay, so something that I really like about the SAT Math no calculator section, which is probably why I like it more than the calculator, is because they're gonna give you simple numbers knowing that you don't have a calculator. So if you're doing something and you're like, this math is too much and I can't, like, no, you're probably doing it wrong. And so it helps you figure out mistakes as you go, versus the calculator. You can literally punch out any number and they have the wrong decimal answer choices lined up for you to pick. But in this one, if you're doing something in the math just doesn't seem easy enough for a no calculator question, look back and see if you messed up somewhere. thing about the grid-in or the free response section is you're never going to have to put in a negative number. So for example, this one, it's asking you for a solution for this equation. When you solve it, you're going to get two solutions, x equals -4 and x equals 3. So at first you're like, well, why are they asking me for a solution if there's two solutions? Well, one of them is negative, so you're going to have to put the 3, because you can't put -4 in there. It's not gonna, there's no like there's no option for a negative sign, so your answers will always be positive. All right, so take a look at this question, pause the video and read it, and then come back. All right, so I'm assuming you've had a go at it. So this is the final question of the entire math no calculator section, so it is a little bit trickier than the other questions. So I'm going to show you how to do it. And basically it's saying that BC, this little arc, is 2/5 of the entire circle, and it wants you to find the degrees of x. So what I'm going to do is I want, what is 2/5 of the entire circle? 360 degrees. And I'm pretty sure that there's an easier way to do this, because it took me a while with no calculator to do it. But I just wanted to throw this out there if you don't have any better ideas to do it. But I'm sure you can find one, I hope so, at least to do it faster. But yeah, I would solve this and then that's your answer. Okay, so this question, pause it a minute to read it. All right, so I'm assuming you've had a go at it. So usually these questions that ask you to divide systems like this, or equations like this, there's two ways to do it. You either want to do long division, which is what I tried and that's not what they wanted, or they want you to simplify something and factor, which is what this was asking for. So you would do x to the third minus 9x over x squared minus 2x minus 3, right? You're dividing that. And so this is gonna equal x times x squared minus 9 over x minus 3 times x plus 1. Also, knowing how to factor quickly like this is really gonna help you out like a lot. I'm just gonna continue my work up here. Sorry, I don't have space. This is gonna equal x. Oh gosh, it's so hard, right? Without the other hand. X times, oh gosh, x multiplied by x minus 3 times x plus 3 divided by, again, x minus 3 times x plus 1. So these two cancel out. So then your final answer is going to have x times x plus 3 over x plus 1, which is answer choice D, final answer. So keep in mind that these types of questions will want you to do different things. So for example, if you're like me and you went long division, the first way didn't work out, keep always in mind these two ways. Sorry, keep in mind these two ways always, in case they're wanting a specific way to do it. And usually there is a specific way, you just gotta figure out which way it is. And you can also look at the answer choices to help you figure that out, which I failed to do because I forgot the other way to do it at first. So also looking at the answer choices to see which format they're in, to try to figure out which method they want you to use. Okay, so something that I forgot to mention is time permitting, check your answers. So on this one, I made the mistake of just solving for x and then getting the answer -1 and 5. But really the answer was just 5, because if I plugged in -1, the two sides would not have equaled. So I know that you don't always have time to do this, but if you can, go ahead and do it. Go ahead and like plug in the answers that you found and check. Something that I want to mention, on the SAT, because their own website, they have answer explanations for their test problems, test practice questions. Their explanations are not always the best. They often overcomplicate very simple questions, or give you like harder, or the way that they give you to do it is very algebraic, with a lot of equations and a lot of solving and just too much stuff, too much work really, where there's a much easier way to do it. So I recommend, if you're stuck on something, read their explanation, but if you're like, wow, like that, I would never have enough time to do that on an actual exam, go search up the question word for word on Google, and somebody probably has asked it before and somebody has answered it. So see what other people have to say as well, and you might find a much faster, much easier way to do it. So yeah. Okay, so something that I noticed when I was grading in my answers, when I was checking the answers for all the pre-response while I was answering them, that they were almost all whole numbers. I had one answer that was 1.5, but that was the only thing. Everything else was nice whole numbers, like 19, 43, you know, things like that. So especially again on the no calculator section, since they know that you don't have a calculator, they're not gonna make it super hard math for you. And so if you don't know the answer to a question, guess a whole number. It's probably in your favor. But again, even on the with calculator, definitely guess, but on the no calculator specifically, guess whole numbers. Alright, so this is the end of this video. One last thing I want to say is the worst kind of mistake that you can make is a careless mistake. Try your hardest to avoid like missing simple addition, because you're so focused on the method that you're using and everything else. So try very hard to avoid doing that. It would be awful to miss points just for something that you know how to do. So practice definitely helps with that. Out of all the tips that I give you, if nothing else, practice. Good luck.